All right. Excuse me. It's 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sam Jack. I'm a librarian at Newton Public Library, and thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, both on Zoom and on Facebook. Um, I will first. I've got a few quick library announcements, and then I'll turn it over to Grady. We're so pleased and happy to have Grady Atwater here to talk about John Brown, public image versus historical reality. So first, a few library stuff, just about what we've got coming up. Hope you all can join us for some or all these things. This Saturday, March 20th, we are having our first used book sale since the start of COVID. Really excited about it. It's one more step back to normal. It's going to be outdoors on the walk up to the front door of the library, and it's weather permitting. At this point, the forecast is looking good. I would expect that to be happening 9 to 1. We got a lot of cool books that you can buy and take, and it's a free will donation. So please plan on that. A week from today, we've got our monthly photography program. This one is with Jenny Gegg, and she will talk about portrait photography, a professional's perspective. She's a professional photographer in Nebraska, and the son of a frequent photography club person here in Newton, Jim Griggs. And then I'll just real quick plug a month for the third Tuesday program, which is what this is for next month on April 20th. It's it's the editors of Kansas Boy, the memoirs of A.J. Bollinger, which has just recently been published by the University Press of Kansas. And Mr. Bollinger, he died in 1977, and this is being published posthumously. It's really interesting perspective on like late 19th, early 20th century Kansas. And one thing of note is that he was a participant in Carrie Nation's saloon raids in Topeka when he was a college student. So that'll be really interesting to hear from them about. There's more than that going on. You can find out on our website or look at the events tab on our Facebook page. I'll try not to go on and on about it. So I think that's enough library announcements. I'll just turn it over to Grady, who he is the site administrator of the John Brown Museum State Historic Site, and which has the Adair Cabin as part of it. And I'll let Grady tell us some more about yourself, and then go on with what you got for us, Grady. Thank you again.
Hello, I'm Grady Atwater. Yes, I am the site administrator of the John Brown Museum State Historic Site, and this is this is a great honor to come to you and talk to you about somebody who really shaped history and continues to shape the present here today in the modern world. And so when we're talking about John Brown, one of the interesting things that comes to fore is the fact that John Brown is always seems to be current, and he always seems to be quite controversial, no matter what historical era that he is. He's people visiting about him or debating. And as a matter of fact, in parts of the South, I have been told on good authority that his name is literally a cuss word. I mean, he's still that current with American culture, and one of the reasons that is the case is that he is not necessarily a person. He is a philosophical archetype for an ideologically motivated activist. And so thus, when people interpret him in film, when people interpret him in books, poetry, in anything, very often the reality of John Brown gets completely lost, because what they're talking about is the philosophical questions that John Brown creates uh, in terms of all of the various questions. Like, for instance, at what point is it morally permissible to use violence to oppose something that is considered immoral? At what point is it possible, is it moral for an individual to break the law if something is viewed as immoral? Questions like that. So therefore, when you start to see where kind of people stand on this and how John Brown himself is often portrayed, this is a reality of Brown, is that the person disappears. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about the reality of John Brown. A few things that tend to be a common thoughts about John Brown is the fact that John Brown was insane. He's often, if you see movies and television, virtually all the time, he's considered, he's portrayed as just really being mentally ill, out of control, a loose cannon, somebody who is, to be frank with you, not, very intelligent, just going on in every whim that strikes him. The reason for this is that the reality of John Brown is not as exciting, nor is it what people want to believe very often. The reality of John Brown is that he was actually he was a calm, level-headed man. And one of the reasons that he could get people to follow him so much is just simply because he tended to be a calm, level-headed man in a crisis. He was the person that was generally generally keeping his cool and thinking when things were falling apart. And so therefore, when he came to Kansas Territory and he became a guerrilla fighter, in far and away from being the hothead everyone else had to calm down, he was the cool head calming down the younger hot-headed abolitionist guerrillas. And if there was violence occurring when he was in command, it was much less violence than was being proposed. So this is something you see a lot in this scene. That John Brown just was out of control is not a reality about John Brown. He was actually just very calm and level-headed. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a few stories from his life to tell you that. John Brown's son, Frederick, who would be what we would call mentally have cognitive disabilities today, was shot and killed by a man named Reverend Martin White through the heart just before the Battle of Osawatomie. Now, in 1858, John Brown, John Henry Kagi, and a man named Eli Snyder topped a hill and hid in a grove of trees above the Reverend Martin White's farm and home in Missouri. Sitting under the tree was Reverend Martin White reading. Unbeknownst to him, a debate was going on in the hill out of sight. Eli Snyder and John Kagi were advising, let's go down and kill him. Let's get even. He killed your son. John Brown looked at him and he shook his head. He says, no. And he said this: people mistake my motives. I fight on principle. I fight and act on principle and principle alone. I will not harm one hair of his head. Free slaves if you must, but do not harm one hair of his head. So that is one example. There's other examples of people who have approached the camp that they were in, and someone automatically wanted to shoot and ask questions later. He said, wait. Let's let somebody in before you do that. He was always the one in situations where he was calming people down, advising more caution. And he did have but over caution he didn't like either. So he tended to be the moderating influence, but you don't see that. And one of the reasons that you don't see that is that doesn't make for a really good movie scene. I mean, let's be frank. It's not very interesting to have a very calm, level-headed older man sitting there calming everybody down. The wild John Brown, who in the Good Lord Bird talks to rabbits, makes a much more interesting scene. No, he didn't do that. Didn't talk to rabbits. Okay. So therefore, that's one thing that a reality about Brown. Now you have to understand, well, why would they say he was mentally ill? We have to understand that people then, now what we term racism today is not racism then. Racism back in the 1850s taught that African Americans were not human. They were basically a lower order of primates below European Americans. Okay. They could be trained to work, and that was about it. And you had to treat them basically like you would a horse or a cow or something like that. Now, here comes John Brown saying, oh, no, you're wrong. African Americans are equals to whites. They are equals in the eyes of God. We need to free them from slavery. It is a moral thing to free them from slavery, to give them equal rights, to allow them the freedoms that everybody has, and treat them fully as equals in American society. Now, today, we don't even blink, so what? But back then, that was mental illness. And you have to understand that mental illness is perceived differently in different situations in different societies. For instance, one of the interesting things about women is that women were very often, if a woman, for instance, said that some of the things, if a daughter or somebody walked in and announced, Dad, I want to go to medical school and be a doctor. Well, today, if they had the grades and everything, we go, congratulations, I'm so proud to have my daughter want to be a doctor. Back in 1850, they would have said, let's take you to a doctor because everyone knows that women can't do that. And you are displaying mental illness, and the term was, you are unsexing yourself by wanting to do a man's occupation. And our Osawatomie State Hospital here literally had patients who were put in for literally being unsexed, or the term was, the arguing with their husbands, things of this nature. As a matter of fact, most women were not educated, maybe enough just to read the Bible past the 8th grade, if that, because it was thought, now this is a serious medical theory at the time, that women would become insane because their brains could not handle the higher level of learning. And the reason that that sexist people came to that conclusion was that when the more educated women became, the more they would question men, and they would read contracts they were told to sign, and they would go, no, I'm not signing that. That doesn't help me out. And so they couldn't admit in their sexist minds that this is an intelligent woman who doesn't want to sign this contract. It clearly is not in her favor. Well, she must be insane because she's not agreeing with me. So you have to understand that insanity is different in different eras. And so that is one reality about Brown that gets misrepresented. The fact that he's portrayed as insane. Where that is, so that's one bad. It makes for really great movie scenes, and great scenes in plays, and great book chapters in books, but it doesn't make for good reality. Now, another thing that gets about Brown that is a reality of Brown, that he is, when people are looking for, one of the things when you're studying history, you have to understand that is is a historical sin called presentism, and that is evaluating the cultural ideals, the cultural realities of an era by your modern era, or the people by your modern era. And John Brown had multiple occupations, and he failed at multiple occupations. But then again, so did 3/4 of the population. What you have to understand, today we live in a world where to be because of the progressives of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, to be a cosmetologist, you have to have a license, and you have to be inspected, and you have to be, everything is codified. If you're going to be a nurse, you have to take an exam, you have to take a test. This came out of the situation in the early to mid 19th century, when you didn't have to do any of these things really. Basically, to be a doctor, in most cases, for instance, what you did was you apprenticed with the doctor. You followed someone around, and the doctor might sign, yes, he's apprenticed with me for 5 or 6 years, and maybe in some states you took a test, and you were a doctor. One of the best illustration of this was Abraham Lincoln, who was president of the United States. How he became a lawyer was he went into a lawyer's office in Illinois, I believe in Springfield, Illinois. He said, I want to be a lawyer. He says, well, that's great. See those stack of books, read those books, the lawyer said. He said, huh? He said, you know, there's only 3 law schools in the United States. He said, how do you think all these people became lawyers? And he had to pass the bar exam. Boom, he's a lawyer. So John Brown would try things, and sometimes they failed, and he failed at them. And what people did was they just kind of got up, dusted themselves off. Well, that didn't work. Let's try this. And so when people are trying to portray Brown, very often they portray him as a failure at everything he did. Well, that's a modern view of things. That would have been seen as virtually completely normal in the 19th century. Most people had multiple occupations, you know. So that's something to keep in mind when you're watching a movie based on when they're trying to, you know, put John Brown into a particular corner. So that's another that, you know, so the reality of Brown is that's another reality, that having multiple occupations was not necessarily a bad thing or an unusual thing. Okay. So that's something to get there. And when you watch movies like that and you see him being portrayed as this person who was a failure and a loser and all this, well, no, he wasn't, because half the country was a loser then. Now, another misrepresentation of Brown in movies and the image of him is that he was in this is where people tend to err on people who want to think he was just a perfect person, and he, you know, somebody that we all want to emulate. You might not want to emulate him in his financial dealings. Let's put it that way. Yes, he failed at many things, but one of the things of the realities of Brown was that he could be downright duplicitous when it came to financial dealings. Well, he himself stated that that to his son, he says, there was a belief that has kept me like a toad under harrow all my life, that a poor man has to borrow money to make money. He says, I don't want my children to do that. But he would get in these tight situations, and this is what he would do. He would have a business idea. Let's say he was going to start, at one point he was going to start a tannery or some sort, and he would borrow money from several people, investors in his business. Well, there was a lot of boom and bust cycles in the 19th century, where the bubble would develop, it would pop, and then everybody would be out. And what would happen is then the business would fail because John Brown would try to jump in on a hot trend of whatever hot trend was going on at the time, like a lot of people were doing. But the difference with John Brown was that he would then, when the people came and said, well, where's my money? He said, well, just wait a little bit. And then he would go find another group of investors for another venture and say, I've got this great venture. And they would all give him money. And instead of putting all the money into the new venture, he would go to the people with the old business venture, and he would pay them off. And the next, that venture would fail. Then there was a string. He was in court constantly. When he was about to be hung, there were multiple court cases against him. He's not somebody you would want to invest money with. Let's put it that way. Not someone you want to trust with your money. He did this multiple times to multiple people, and yet he was still able to, get people to follow him. And he himself admitted why. He says, he got in the bad belief that he had to have credit, and he would do anything to get it. And so, financially, yes, if there was a place where he was a failure, it was money management. He wasn't terribly good at it. Now, one reason that he was a poor money manager that he said that he himself stated, the second reason was that he was so dedicated to the abolitionist cause that he stated at one point in the 1850s that he says he had for like a decade, he had never taken a venture on that he could not close it up in 2 weeks so he could go help slaves escape, so he could not have work in the abolitionist cause. And that was first in his life. And you will find this with a lot of people who are activists. Practical things just go by the wayside. And you start looking at their practical side, it's okay, fine, but this will help the cause. And so one reason that he was a poor business person was that he was so dedicated to the abolitionist cause that he was willing to set aside the practical practices of business to affect a good business decision. So this was something that John Brown Jr., especially when he was trying to help his father, because John Brown Jr. Was forever trying to get his business dealings straightened out, and he was always frustrated by his father. He says he tried to get payroll paid, and he says, "Well, we can help these slaves over here." He said, "Well, that's great, but we got to do payroll." And he would go help the slaves instead of doing payroll. But this is but that is the reality. That's one of the realities when you see that, and that's true. Yeah. Now, another reality about Brown that often gets portrayed that dedication can be a double-edged sword. And what that means is sometimes people who are very dedicated can have a problem that they don't know when to back down. And John Brown, once he had a plan or once he wanted to do something, he would keep pushing that plan until trying to find creative ways to get it done until it just became apparent that there is absolutely no way. So if you were writing with him, he would argue with you to the point that, we're not quitting. We're not quitting. And so just to give you a little example of that, one time in camp, after in Kansas territory, they were camped and they wanted to make coffee. John Brown liked tea. Okay. And he liked tea. And so he says, no, I'd really rather we have tea because, the coffee is a little strong and you'll all be awake. And he said, no, we want to have coffee. And they went to fake. He says, no. And he went and grabbed the coffee, poured it out and said, he says, we're having tea. This guy, George Gill, said this. And this was an example of we're not giving up. Because the going got very, very tough at times because abolitionists, you have to understand, were hated. We tend to think of them as civil rights pioneers and all that, but at the time, the vast majority of European Americans hated them. I mean, if abolitionists tried to get together to have a meeting, what would happen is they would literally be mobbed by just stones thrown at them, and that was a problem that they had. And so you needed someone like John Brown up there saying, regardless of the fact people are throwing rocks at us, we are going to keep going. So that is another image of that Brown that is often kind of portrayed in a negative light. But you find that in virtually every activist. We're not giving up. We've had setbacks, but we're not giving up. And so that's one reason why he's still current, because people look at that and go, well, he never gave up. Now, one of the things too, and understand that we're going to get into why movie makers do what they do to John Brown and to every other historical character. And it's the same thing to do with that, why authors do what they do to them, why every journalist, why every artist does what they do to John Brown, to every historical character. Because when you're an historian and you're watching biopics or you're watching these things, you just start sputtering because you're going, no, he didn't wear that kind of clothes and all that. Well, just to facilitate that, at Emporia State University, I took a course called History and the Arts, and we explored why that was. Here's the problem with someone who is writing a book, making a movie, writing a play, whatever, about an historical figure. They're not historians. They're artists. They're directors. They have a scene. They have maybe a 4-5 play scene. And as a movie is just basically a play that they're filming. They can't do all the details that are historically correct. So what they'll do is they'll take maybe 5 years of activities and they will smash it into one scene. And they'll change change this and change that, because sometimes history's not, the courage is mundane. I mean, doing a mundane thing like coming out to Kansas and just building a cabin and standing and sitting out there waiting for 3 weeks for maybe some pro-slavery people to burst out of the woods and kill you. Well, that's fine, but what do you do with the 3 weeks if you're a movie director? You get that little 5 minutes and you get the idea that people were fighting all the time. No, they would wait like a month and all of a sudden, boom, someone's out there to kill them. So very basically, so what they'll do is they'll smash all that into one scene. And then even if that's not exciting, they'll insert things to make it a little more exciting so you'll watch it. And so this is something to keep in mind when you're watching a movie about an historic figure and their life is just one exciting thing after another. It wasn't. They were ordinary people that had to go to the store and fix dinner and do all the things we all do. They just don't film that. Now, so that's one reason why that you'll see misrepresentations. Now, another thing that'll happen when they show John Brown is when they're showing John Brown, talking about John Brown is that the real John Brown probably wouldn't make a good movie. Okay, he was a level-headed, slightly. Let's say slightly tinged with con artist qualities, dedicated activist who basically spent most of his time going around helping, and he actually did this, helping African Americans escape from slavery, which could be really very, mundane in many cases. It doesn't make for a good movie. But the image of John Brown is this wild-eyed, insane person who just flies off at the handle and talks to rabbits and shoots every third person he sees just because he doesn't like their hat or something like that. It makes for a really much better movie scene. So that's what you're going to get. So it's just something to keep in mind realistically when you're watching how they make movies, and that's what they do. They're trying to make it entertaining, and reality is not always necessarily entertaining. As a matter of fact, the life on the frontier could be terribly, terribly dull. I mean, just if you watch in any case, what would happen very often is they would just go days and not see another human being and just basically sitting around listening to the wind blow. It's just, and so that doesn't make for a good movie. And so they don't show that. They just show the action parts of life. And so, you just have to keep that in mind when you're watching movies or reading a novel. Now, another thing that'll happen is, say, with John Brown or any other character in a movie, is they'll insert a love interest where there is none, or they'll insert a character. And this is because in movies, they will invent what are called composite characters. A composite character in a biopic is an individual that they don't really have the time to explore all 25 people in a group, so they'll invent one individual who has the qualities of that individual, of that group he was with. And this happens with John Brown. About every movie they'll insert someone like that. It's not anything against John Brown. It's very basic. The ones in movies and television, they're having to be practical because they've got a budget and they can't hire 25 people, and they've got to do this. And plus they want the scene to be 5 minutes long or 10 minutes or 15 minutes long. And even if you're writing a book, when I was writing my master's thesis on John Brown, I couldn't, I got to the Battle of Osawatomie, for instance, and it was like 40 pages long. And I got down to where I had the commander, John Reed, the commander of the pro-slavery force, riding a white mule, the type of rifle he had. And I went in there, I was just so proud of that. And my thesis advisor, his important state look, and he was drawing lines. So he says, "That's cool, Grady, but we don't need that. That doesn't prove your point." And I was going, "You know how hard I worked?" He says, "Yeah, that's pretty interesting, but that had nothing to do with your point." But that's just. But the same thing occurs in movies. That's what occurs in movies. And it's something you have to, when I watch movies, I'd have to remind myself of the things I'm saying right now, because you get kind of frustrated because you're a history buff, or you're interested in history, or maybe know the situation, and you're going, no, it was a blue car, it was no, they didn't have time because the blue cars were too expensive, for the production. So I mean, that's the reality. So, but what a movie, television show, fiction, things you should propel us to go to your library and do research. Okay, that's what it did with me. When I would read novels and everything, I would go to the library. I went to the Osawatomie Public Library, and I started at one end of the history, the non-history nonfiction, and I went to the other. And so you just go to the library and do research. You should ask questions: what's real and what's not in this show? Let's go find out. So and that's one way I learned about what was real and wasn't real about John Brown. So just so it's not that I don't belabor 733. That point, but just understand that they have practical realities that they have to do. Now, one reality you have to understand about John Brown is he is seen through the lens very often of something called the lost cause theory of interpretation of the Civil War. And what the lost cause, and I'll just give you another, and you hear a lot about this with the statues and everything like that. Well, what the lost cause is this was the United Daughters of the Confederacy, following the Civil War, wanted to ensure that the Confederacy would be remembered in, say, a very positive light. And what happened to Northerners was when they went south to fight in the Civil War, they saw the reality of slavery. And they had a problem now because the Southerners had a problem because everyone was going, that's just, even Northerners, even racist Northerners thought that was, didn't believe that was morally correct. So that to kind of rehabilitate the Southern image, what they had to do was they had to come up with something. So they came up with a lost cause. And here's the way it goes. I'll give you it in a nutshell, because I hear it at the John Brown Museum State Historic Site about roughly, every third visitor. The slaves were happy, well-adjusted, and being extremely well-treated by Southern white owners. The only reason that they became unhappy was that the abolitionists, i.e., and chief among them who usually gets mentioned is like John Brown, is what they usually say, came in and told them and got them all riled up and told them that they were slaves and they should not want to be slaves. And so they got all riled up and they wouldn't have tried to escape had it not been for the abolitionists coming in there. And if it weren't for the abolitionists, the people in the North were perfectly happy with people who were owning slaves in the South. And the abolitionists got them all riled up. Now you notice who the bad guy here is in all this, is the abolitionists. And then what happened was, because the abolitionists kept getting everyone riled up about what everybody was just content with, and the slaves were content, and the whole country was content, we had the Civil War. Now, this is where we get into the Southern culture was superior. They were superior culture, superior soldiers. The only reason they lost to the inferior rabble of Yankees was because of the fact that they were outnumbered and they were out and they couldn't manufacture enough weapons. It wasn't about slavery. And then they said, but it wasn't about slavery either. It was about you telling us we couldn't own slaves. Well, kind of the same thing, but hey, if you point that out, people get mad. But it was about states' rights. It was about states' rights, and you were impeding our states' rights. Okay. And so it wasn't about slavery. The slaves were happy. Now, you may ask, well, if Northerners heard this, and why didn't they debunk it back in, say, 1865? Here's why. Because all of a sudden it began to dawn on very racist Northerners who did not want to have African Americans flooding the North, competing for their jobs, competing and being around them. They said, well, maybe we can go along with this if it keeps African Americans segregated and away from us. And so when you look and listening into why John Brown is interpreted the way he is, most of the time you're hearing the lost cause rhetoric. Oh, come on. And so you're hearing that, and that's what you hear. And that's what most of the misinterpretation about Brown is. So therefore, and I will tell you this, I am a John Brown expert. You know what that means? All that means is I know I don't know a lot, and I'm learning more every day. And John Brown's effect on history, on the present, is so complex that it evolves and changes even in the present day. And it changes every day, changes every week, and I'm always learning something new. And so that's one thing. John Brown is an archetype for ideological action. John Brown is this, John Brown is that. And the people connected to John Brown, up to Malcolm X, who famously stated that if you want to be our ally, you have to be like John Brown. And made statements like, the only person I trust is the white man I trust is John Brown, and they hung him. So he still is viable today. And I have visitors come literally from all over the world to Osawatomie, to the John Brown Museum, and merely because John Brown is an international phenomenon. People study John Brown in Germany, Japan, Africa. He's worldwide known. So John Brown, the image, is not always John Brown, the reality. And that will probably continue to be the case because people see John Brown in the light of the philosophy they choose to accept. As there are any questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Grady. Great, really a lot of interesting stuff. And now we've got some questions coming in. And folks, you can type your question. On Zoom, there's a Q&A feature. You can use that. You can also type them in the chat. And those of you watching on Facebook, I've got that here on my phone, so you can type your questions there too. And yeah, so let's see. Dale Allison asked, what was John Brown's relationship with Frederick Douglass?
They were friends. They were close allies. This is one thing if you watch, say, The Good Lord Bird, where they're fighting each other. They did argue, but they were still friends. They were before the Harper's Ferry raid. He spent 2 days in a rock quarry trying to convince Brown not to go because he would be captured, not out of any particular because he cared about him. He didn't want him to get captured and killed. John Brown, he said that Frederick Douglass said John Brown is in spirit a black man. A high compliment coming from Frederick Douglass. Yeah, they were very good friends. They were allies. He allowed John Brown to stay at his house and write his provisional constitution. Good friends. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ron asked, in describing the lost cause, why was nothing said about all of the Northerners who owned slaves? So how that factors into the lost cause myth, the Northern slave owners.
Okay, Northern slave, yes, there were Northern slaveholders, and one of the things, the reason that you factor in the Northerners into the lost cause is that Northerners bought into it too, because what it did was it helped to ensure white supremacy. I'll just say it out loud. In the North, Northerners, the difference there's an interesting difference between discrimination and segregation in the North and the South. In the South, it was overt and legal, but interestingly enough, white Southerners were willing to say go to work and work shoulder to shoulder with African Americans, and they just did not believe in socializing necessarily with African Americans. Northerners tended in the 19th century to be, I don't want to set eyes on African Americans. They did not want to look at them. They did not want to live within a mile of them. This is where you got sundown towns. You know, we don't want you in our town after dark. And here, I hate to say it, in Osawatomie, African Americans weren't allowed to live in Osawatomie until, I believe, the 30s. They lived in two basic shanty towns, west and north of town. And so very basically Northerners didn't particularly, they fed into that because it helped to bolster up white supremacy.
Yeah. Phil asked, how long did John Brown live in Osawatomie?
He was here around about a year and a half, a little bit more, when you add it all up. Mm-hmm. And he came and went from here. This was his headquarters, but it was the safest place he could possibly be. He could walk the streets without worrying about someone trying to, capture him, attack him. He could, as a matter of fact, if you were an escaping slave, it was the same way. I mean, you could basically be relatively safe because if anybody pro-slavery came within 2 miles of Osawatomie, they were met by a group of guerrillas who literally would shoot them down. So yeah, he was here about a year and a half.
Yeah. Okay. Susie has an interesting question here. Who characterized him? And I think she's thinking of the image at the State House. Who characterized him with this long beard, with his arms raised, looking like he's instigating trouble? And I would kind of add to that, how do you think the artist might have been influenced by this kind of lost cause Southern interpretation of Brown in creating that mural?
Very much so. John Stewart Curry painted that, and he was looking for somebody or a symbol of Bleeding Kansas. And he certainly found it in John Brown, which was accurate in saying John Brown was a central symbol of Bleeding Kansas. Now, interestingly enough, though, if you look at that image, and I do an hour-and-a-half presentation on this, but I won't do that now. But very basically, it's not what you think what he's doing. John Stewart Curry did the beard and the John Brown's face based on Moses, on Leonardo da Vinci, on Michelangelo's statue of Moses. That's what it's based on. It's based on Moses. Moses coming down if you get down to what he's based it on, was Moses coming down with the tablets. If he's got his arms out, he's not portraying somebody. He's portraying, I'm coming down here to, you all are doing something evil. And so if you get into the artist's mind, that's what he was trying to do. It did kind of fill into the lost cause, because that's what was taught. The United Daughters of the Confederacy were brilliant about getting it established as historical fact. This is the primary historical fact, and it was just almost nationwide. So any image you see from that time, you will incorporate that, and especially with public art that was going to be presented to the public in general, because art tends to music, art, painting, poetry, movies tends to reflect the cultural ideals and realities of its era, and that certainly does so.
Yeah, that's interesting. So have you like given have you given lectures at the State House in front of the artwork? That'd be kind of fun. I was curious.
I know I haven't, but I just do it for. I did it for my local art teacher. She was in there. She asked me if I knew anything about that painting. I says, "Oh yeah, I can break it down literally from the top to the bottom of it, because I studied it, the symbology of it."
Yeah. So here's, thank you. Here's a question from Jane. I mean, you kind of talk about, he wasn't crazy. He was a level-headed person. So what was it that did drive him? Was it religion, about, freeing the slaves specifically? And then how does using violence factor in with those motivations that he had?
Okay, you just hit on my master's thesis. My master's thesis on his motivation and his John Brown, Religion and Violence, Motivation in American History. 2 years of my life, but it was his religious beliefs, and specifically what it was his Calvinist religious beliefs, and I'll put it in a nutshell. That took up 2 chapters. So, the eyes of God.
Okay, we lost you for a second.
Okay, I'm sorry. Did you? Okay, that's what I was worried about. Do you have me now?
Yeah, you. Yeah, could you just back up a little bit with what you were saying? I think we got you back.
Okay. Um, what happened was that, okay, old order Calvinism, okay? Um, Old order Calvinism was a belief that all people are equal in the eyes of God, okay? And what that argues is that no matter what race, what gender, where you live, all people are equal in the eyes of God. Secondarily, whereas all people are equal in the eyes of God, for you to say you are better than, superior to someone else in any way, shape, or form is a sin against God. Okay? Because it's a sin of pride. Okay? If you're abusing people in the name of God on pride and based on pride, then that is a sin. And then he took all the other sins that were being committed against African Americans, sexual assault, domination, all, stealing their labor, everything like that. He said his term for slavery was the sum of all villainies. So that motivated. Now, here's what really motivated him to act. Okay. Number one, the thing that motivated him to act was the Calvinist belief that God does not necessarily work a miracle. That's why God gave you a brain, an arm, and two legs. And you are God's arm on earth to get something done. So therefore, he believed that if a Christian saw something wrong being done, and he did not stop and go do something about it, it wasn't God's fault that it happened. It was the Christian's fault that it happened. And when Judgment Day, that Christian is going to be judged as harshly as the person doing the evil act. And that was his motivation right there, in a nutshell. Yeah.
That's it seems like that would be such a hard, I mean, to live up to that so that you can have self-esteem. Is that something that he struggled with?
Oh, yeah. There's a reason why a lot of people aren't older travelers anymore. It puts you under a lot of pressure. And it also, but on the other, it puts you under a lot of pressure. He was troubled. As a matter of fact, he was described as someone who was always brooding and thinking. And when he walked, for instance, he would always walk staring at the ground as if he was in deep thought, because he was. If you believe, I'm responsible for righting all the wrongs around me, you're certainly going to have a lot of stress, putting it mildly. So yes, it did affect him. He was, he could be just set. When they talk about him going off from the camp and praying and talking to God, it was just that he was trying to figure out, how do I solve these problems?
Yeah. Susie asked, are the shanty towns still around? Does Osawatomie show remnants such as slave houses?
Oh yes, we have. We don't have slave houses. We didn't have any slave houses, but we have 7 sites that are on the National Register. We have the John Brown Museum State Historic Site. We have the Old Stone Church, which is built by Reverend Samuel Adair and the abolitionists from 1858 to 1861. We have there are numerous older. There are about 3 or 4 older homes that we know were stations on the Underground Railroad where slaves were brought in and kept. Yes, we have multiple sites. The Soldiers Monument, which is the graves of the five Free State men who died, including Frederick Brown, at the Battle of Osawatomie. We have the battlefield. Yes, we have multiple sites that we preserved.
Yeah, cool. And you all are, or talk about this real quick. You all are open, correct? I mean, with COVID precautions?
We are open 10 to 5, Tuesday through Saturday, or by appointment.
Mhm.
I mean, we and not only that, you can see multiple other sites here in town.
Cool. Yeah, I haven't been down there. I definitely need to, next time I'm headed that direction, put that on my list to
Well, we'd love to see you all.
Yeah, we got a few more questions. I think we've got some more time.
I have time.
Awesome. So Judith asked, I read The Good Lord Bird, and I'm sure some more people also have seen the miniseries that came out recently. What did you think of it in general? Were you rolling your eyes often?
Oh, more than often. Okay. What happened was, okay, he says it's a novel to begin with. Okay, I'll give James McBride props on that. Okay, he did. He said it's a novel. It's not history, and he never said it was history. The issue, the problem that historians will have with someone when they say that is that a lot of times sometimes some people, not all, but some people who read these things don't realize that. And their entire impression of an historical figure comes from a work of fiction. When I was watching it, for instance, the Talking to the Rabbit. Okay, no, he did not do things like talk to rabbits, and he did not go ramble on like that. He was known, as a matter of fact, he had kind of a brusque, sarcastic way of putting things, and that would get cut right to the matter very often. Now, the long prayers that he did, yeah, the long prayers, that was true. Owen being frustrated with him, wanting him dad. Owen and John Brown Jr. and all of them, very basically, they rejected his religious beliefs because they had been raised in it, and they didn't reject him, but they just, Dad, we don't want to do it, when he's, yeah. But there are things, okay, the Osawatomie raid. Now that one, I was sitting there really rolling my eyes. John Brown did not cut off anyone's head. Okay, the reason that the Osawatomie raid is 10 times more complicated than it is put out, than it is represented in the movie or any other movie in the Good Lord Bird. Very basically, to put it in a nutshell, John Brown had literally gone up and played the part of a government surveyor and asked these people directly, what are your plans for the Browns? And they said, we are going to go over the house the following Wednesday. From the next Wednesday, we're going to set their house on fire and kill them when they come out. He'd gone into the camp of around 100 guerrillas that had come up from Georgia. What are your plans? We're going to attack Osawatomie, go over, and we're going to attack the Browns and all those abolitionists down by Lane. Okay, he had reconnoitered this, and so what had happened was that the swords, he had gotten some swords from the guy, and this is another point that I'll raise about John Brown, but he got the swords, and his sons and one other guerrilla had no idea really how to use a sword. There is a proper way, and I don't know, this is no way to make this pretty, to kill someone, to cut someone's throat. You can do it in one swoop. If you know what you're doing, it's relatively quick, and they fall over, and your fight is over. They didn't know how to do that. They just looked at them, and they threw these men to the ground that they yelled, and the men started hacking. And I'm going to tell you, it affected them, PTSD, the rest of their lives. PTSD, the rest of their lives. They never recovered from it. If you think they were heartless, cruel killers. But very basically, John Brown was nowhere near it. He did shoot the older Doyle father in the forehead as a coup de grace, to show that he was to his sons who came out of the darkness after killing these men who would threaten literally to kill them as they burned out and ran out of their burning cabin, shaking. And he could tell that they were just needed to see that he was willing to get his hands dirty too. And that's why he did that. But I could go through that. That's an entire, we could be here. But yes, I rolled my eyes all the way through it.
Yeah, thank you. Cindy's question, do you have any photos of his family, and what happened to his family? Especially, his death was a national, global sensation, and I wonder if what happened to his family after that.
Okay, what happened to his family after even Potawatomi and after the Civil War was they came under intense pressure by people who either just loved John Brown or hated him. And so much so that the bulk of them, most all of them, literally left the East and sought to escape to California to live. And so, but what happened was that literally on their way to California, some pro-slavery advocates in a wagon train behind them found out that the John Brown's sons were in the wagon train ahead of them and literally threatened to ride up and kill them. So they had to separate out from the wagon train and go to California by themselves so that not to be killed. Well, they settled. The majority of them settled in northern one Altadena, California, Sacramento, Redmond, California, up in northern California is where they tended to live. And then some of them moved down to Pasadena. There's a lot of Browns in California. And so Owen Brown, John Brown Jr. ended up living in Put-in Bay, Ohio. He died of old age, natural causes. Solomon Brown was in Owen and them. They moved to around Altadena and lived, and they basically bought a hill, and they were sheep herders. And so John Brown's daughters lived relatively long. Those that survived to adulthood lived relatively long lives. His daughter Annie Brown, literally, and this is kind of ironic, was a school at a Freedmen's School in the former home of Governor Henry Wise, who had hung her father. She was literally teaching, and she said at one point she was teaching in a room where the governor's pictures was hanging above her head. So yes, I mean but they, to varying degrees, they all that lived their lives out. It's literally on all their gravestones, son or daughter of John Brown, the abolitionist.
Wow. And I guess, are there still, living descendants?
Oh, yes. I've had 14 to the museum.
Wow.
I'm going to use the one that scared me almost. This fellow walked in, and I thought I was looking at a ghost. I'm not joking. He was John Brown genetically reassembled. I mean, looked, walked, talked, had the eyes, had everything like that. And he goes, "I'm John Brown." I go, "I believe you." He looked exactly like he was John Brown's great-great-great-grandson, and he'd been told he looked like John Brown all his life. And I go, "Yeah, let's get you beside a picture." He was his height, he was everything, and they still have the family naming, and he was John Brown like the 13th or something like that. And yes, I've had 14 through the museum. They they come through the museum ever so often.
Wow, that's really.
You had 20 children, 9 of which you lived to adulthood.
Yeah.
I mean, so they had a lot of kids.
Here's a question from Ron. How can we find out about Kansas towns which have been identified as sundown towns?
How do you find out about that? The State Historical Society should be able to help you with that. If you look at, the archives, but one way to do it is civil rights history pages and in archives will have those. So it's just various places, but the Kansas Historical Society is a good place to start looking because that sort of thing has been really has been preserved in quite a bit.
Yeah, and I do happen to know there's some the ACLU of Kansas posted a list a while ago, and the source for that was a book called Sundown Towns by James Lowen. And I'm not sure if we have that in our library, but we can put in a interlibrary loan request for that. If anybody's Ron or anybody else interested in some more on that subject. Well, let's see here. Oh, if you've got some more time, Grady, but Jane.
I have time.
Okay, great.
I'm here for you.
So Jane,
how long you want me to be here?
Jane, I'm going to rephrase her question a little bit. She said, was he more violent than the average abolitionist? Were most abolitionists pacifists?
He was less violent than a lot of violent abolitionists. As you know, there were abolitionists in Osawatomie that he literally had to slow down because there was one incident that before the Battle of Osawatomie that kind of sparked the Battle of Osawatomie formally, called the Battle of New Georgia, and I literally have kind of seen where it was. You know, it's people locally point and says, "Yep, it's that place where I've seen a house that was originally New Georgia." But some pro-slavery men came in. They were going to build a town. They were going to counter the voting power of Osawatomie, build a town 3 miles west of Osawatomie. And John and some hotheads were going to just go kill them all. And John said, "No, don't kill them. No, we're not going to do that." He said, "Oh, we're going to go. You old man. Be quiet." And so he went with them in an effort, and he literally probably saved dozens of lives by holding them back from being as violent as they would have liked to have been. But they burned the town down to 3 houses, and I've literally stood in front of one of the houses. You know what I mean? That survived New Georgia. And so he was less violent than many abolitionists, and it's only because he's just been portrayed that way that he gets portrayed that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. A question came in on Facebook from Margaret. When did Osawatomie first put up monuments to John Brown?
The first monuments that were put up was in 1877. That was a soldier's monument, and John Brown's name is on it, and that's the graves of the 5 Free State men who died there. Around 10,000 people came to that dedication. That's how popular Brown was, and his name is on it, but he's not buried there, and that's the first one, really. The next one was put up. It was the statue. It was the statue of John Brown in 1935. That was cast in Paris and brought over and placed that would be the statue. But that first one was in 1877. And what they had done was the graves had been scattered, and there was a general problem that they were having was in Osawatomie, and it happened in every little town in the West and in Kansas, that people would just they would have family plots on their property. And this was creating health problems, let's put it that way, getting in the water to him. And so they established Oakwood Cemetery, and they said, well, we've got these heroes who died at the Battle of Osawatomie. What are we going to do? Well, let's bury them here, and they have a special graveyard for them. So they did that in 1877.
Okay. Yeah. Here, Dean just asked, what are some good books about John Brown, for people that hear this and want to learn more?
Okay. The best book about John Brown is that, I'm going to warn you, it's a heavy read, but if you want to know facts about John Brown, this is the best book about John Brown. It's called John Brown, A Biography 50 Years After by Oswald Garrison Villard. It was published in 1910. And what makes it the best book, biography ever written about Brown, is it's around 700 pages and of details. And the way they knew that was that many of the people were still alive when they wrote it, and Oswald Garrison Villard and his assistant Virginia Mail out to interview these people and get letters from them. And so you're getting from the horse's mouth these things happen. And so that's the best book. But warn you, but just have a read. The first good read, the first one I ever read, and I'll tell you this one, is To Purge This Land with Blood, a biography of John Brown. That was the first one I read. Is by Stephen Oates. And that's the first one I read. It's a good starter book. When you're picking out books about John Brown, though, be careful about something. Everyone's going to give their editorial opinion about John Brown. Okay. There's 4 views of Brown, and you're going to hear him and read him in every book. He's a villain. He's a hero. He's a good man who used the wrong methods. And with a good cause, who had used the wrong methods. And there's mine, which is I don't judge good or bad, because to quote every history professor at Emporia State University, when you start judging good and bad in history, you'll prove yourself right. So you don't do that. John Brown was an ideologically motivated guerrilla fighter, activist for the abolitionist cause. Boom, and I stop there. And you're going to have books that are going to go one of those 4, generally speaking. So you have to be careful. What's the author's bias, as it were. I try to have a non-bias, which is probably a bias. Yes, but those are 2. Now, the best cultural book it's got a long title. It's John Brown, The Man Who Ended Slavery, Seated Us, by David Reynolds. And it's the best cultural book. And what it does is it talks about the cultural aspect of John Brown. And it's a very good one. That's those 3, I would say.
Thanks. And what could you say? What was the title of that first book that you mentioned again?
Okay, John Brown, a biography 50 years after, by Oswald Garrison Villard.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. And I will
published in 1910.
I've got the other 2 as well. I will include these in the email that we'll send out afterward with the recording, so people can look into that, as well as links to the John Brown Museum and anything else you might want to suggest to me, Grady. We can.
All right, sure enough.
I think this is a good wrapping up point. Thank you all for your questions, really great questions. And again, Grady, thanks. This was an amazing presentation. We've already had several comments coming in that people really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So I would just encourage one more time, check out the John Brown Museum. And they've got a website as well that you can look at for some more information. And Grady, I hope to have you back sometime. It sounds like you've got lots more knowledge to share.
I'll be back anytime you like me. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Great. Really appreciate it. Yeah. So thanks again, everyone. And yeah, if you missed something or want to go back, just look for the recording. I'll get it posted in the next few days here. All right. I'll just sign off. Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.